Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. This is part 2 with Judy Mandel. If you recall, for those listeners at 1 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, or for those that saw it on our YouTube channel last Thursday, we had Judy and with Phyllis and I talking about the book White Flag, a story about trauma and addiction. And in that interview, if you recall, we had discussed about the first book that Judy had written about a decade ago, that may have been the impetus of not only the way she felt when dealing with her niece Cheryl's addiction and the other issues surrounding what it was like when she was trying to reacclimate herself back into society, but it was part of a possible issue called replacement child syndrome. And that is the name of the first book. So today we are going to be talking about replacement child syndrome, as well as the book Replacement Child, with Judy Mandel. And of course, Phyllis and I together will go ahead and look at a lot of the questions that maybe we did not explore in the last episode, but any additional questions that we uncover. Because upon reading this book, and for those of you who recall, I do have kind of a personal connection here in relation to my father having been a witness to the plane crashes that were involved. I have been looking into understanding the trauma itself of either the witness or especially the survivors of what was a horrific event back in the 50s. Now, I must issue my disclaimer, and I want to make sure I get that out of the way before we move forward. I just want to say this show is for information purposes, to foster an open conversation of experiences and insights in health. The content does not represent the views of talkradio.nyc or of Frank About Health, and we are presenting insights for your consideration. The views expressed are purely those of myself, my co-host Phyllis, and my guest today, Judy, and are not meant to be taken as medical advice. Please remember that you should always consult a medical professional before making any changes to your medical care. Therefore, while being frank about health, we want you to maintain whatever treatments and quality of life management programs that are working best for you. We hope to add value during the next hour. That all being said, welcome back, Judy. And of course, welcome as always, Phyllis.
Judy, you're on mute. So just unmute yourself. Okay, and welcome back.
Hi.
It's good to see
Thank you. Thanks so much. Nice to see you both.
Yes. So I can tell you, I looked at the YouTube channel. I think our show had garnered both when we first aired as well as when we encored last week, over 35 views. That's a very positive number, considering that we've only migrated to the YouTube channel from Facebook over the past 4 or 6 weeks, I believe, at this point. But I know the content was very enriching, and we just felt we wanted to really get an understanding. Well, first of all, I mean, did we have any unanswered questions from our discussion on addiction and White Flag? I mean, Phyllis, did you have anything left unsaid?
No, but towards the end of that interview, Judy had talked about replacement child, and it was very intriguing. And I was so glad she could come back and join us again this evening, because there were so many questions about that were left unanswered. So, Judy,
Yes.
Can you share with us what was the reason you felt the need to write that? And I am not familiar with replacement child syndrome, although I think I'm working it out for myself, but I don't want to presume. I really want to know. So Could you share that with us, please?
Yes, sure. And you're not alone. It's not talked about very much, and I had never heard of it either until I started writing this book, Replacement Child, which is a while ago. Boy, when you said it's a decade, that sounds like so long ago. Mm. And it was a long time ago.
Yes.
So I started writing Replacement Child really to tell the story of my family. I had no idea about replacement child condition. So I wanted to tell the story about how the plane crash, it was the second of 3 plane crashes in 1952 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And this plane crashed right into my parents' apartment. They lived in a 3-story over a candy store, and it really the plane cut off the top of the building and spewed jet fuel into their apartment, flames, and My 7-year-old sister was killed in that crash. But my mom saved 3 people that day. And she was always a hero to me for doing that. My 2-year-old sister was engulfed in flame, and my mother did get her out. She rolled her down the front stairs of the building, the only way out of the building. And she was handing my sister Linda off to some stranger that actually just happened by. And he saw that there was no way she could go back in for her other daughter, and held her back. And sure enough, that floor collapsed like at that moment. So she really had no chance. But before that, she had gotten her own mother out. She had gotten a friend of my 7-year-old sister, Donna. She had gotten her friend out, and she got my sister Linda out, and then she got out. So, I wanted to tell that story. I know she had tried to tell the story. I had a lot of notes from her where she tried to write out the story in longhand many times. I have all of these legal pads of her writings, and she left me an envelope filled with the newspaper clippings and notes and a lot of material. And of course, I grew up with my sister Linda, who was badly burned in the crash, so I knew the aftermath of that. And I wanted to tell the story, but I wasn't sure what story I was telling. And it turns out I was also telling my own story, and that I was born after the death of my sister, and was really the replacement child. I came upon that term, which was coined, I think, in 1964. And it was really to do with Holocaust survivors. And certainly there's an entire generation of replacement children from the Holocaust. So it was research that was done about that and replacement children. The strict definition is a child born after the death of another. But it can also be applied to many different conditions. It can be, when there might be a miscarriage, there might be an adoption. There are many different kinds of replacement children, and I've found out more about it, as I found other replacement children and formed the Replacement Child Forum, which is something we tried to bring awareness to this. Yes. One of our co-founders is a psychologist, and she deals exclusively with replacement children. So, we tried to put a wealth of information on there about the condition. I know it has been called a syndrome, and it has been called a condition. And there are, certain features of it that I've found when I've met others, that we have a lot of the same things. We have issues with identity. We have insecurities about who we are and what we're doing, and which in some ways we feel a brotherhood or sisterhood, between us. So
it's a fascinating thing. And now that you've said that it really has its etiologies in Holocaust families that survived, or Holocaust, survivors that went on to create families, second families, if you will. It makes perfectly good sense. I understand the term better, but I'm curious. It sounds as though you've put together some kind of a forum, but I'm going to presume it's a little bit of a support group or a connection group.
Yeah, we do webinars and we do outreach. People write to us, and we, have ongoing conversations, and people do blog posts, and we do blog posts, and we try to reach people, and we try to put up resources for people as well.
So could you give me a couple of 3 characteristics that seem to show up as a result of feeling as though you are a replacement child, or getting that sense?
Sure. And one of the big ones is identity, trying to come to terms with your own identity and who you are, feeling that you're replacing someone, it makes it difficult to understand your place, that you are an individual on your own, and, your existence is worthwhile just as you.
Mhm.
When we talk to parents, we try to accentuate that piece of it, that it's so important to recognize a child for their individuality, as a unique person. They're not, they're not their sister, they're not their brother, they're who they are. I think that is probably the biggest. Often also when there's a child who's died, especially, there's grief. And, living with a parent who's going through grief. In my case, my mother was going through grief when she carried me, when she was pregnant with me, which now I've found out is, through writing White Flag, I've found out that that is even, another way that things are passed down is when the mother is under stress like that. And grief is certainly a stress.
Judy, what made you think you were replaced and not conceived?
Good question.
You mean a replacement to my?
Yes,
to my
that your conception was intentional to replace someone who had passed, as opposed to your conception being, we hope we have a miracle of a child.
Right, and it could be both, and it is both. I felt
what led you to think that it might possibly be the replacement piece.
Sure. Well, I know my parents only wanted 2 children. They, I had been told they wouldn't have had another child if my other sister had lived. So that was certainly a clue. I felt a distance mostly from my father. I think for my mother, I was that miracle child for her. And I think it helped her a great deal to have me. But I also, after looking back at pictures and in retrospect, when I was a child, I looked very much like the daughter they lost. I can't imagine that they didn't think of that. My father had a big problem with connecting with me, and I do feel like I couldn't replace his firstborn daughter.
Wow. We're about to take our first break, but before we do, I wanted to ask you quickly, how soon after what happened in Elizabeth were you conceived? Was it like literally a year later? Was it a couple years later? Was there at least something?
It was the accident was in 1952. I was born in 54, so it was, pretty close.
Pretty close. All right, when we return, we're going to talk about Replacement Child, the book, as well as further develop some of the questions Phyllis just asked, in addition to really understanding the impact that not only in writing the book, that this whole entire paradigm that has defined her life, but at the same time created a very successful career in writing. So please stay tuned as we're talking about Replacement Child right here on Frank About Health, both on talkradio.nyc and on our YouTube channel. Be back in a few.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back. We're here with Judy Mandel discussing replacement child. Before the break, I was questioning pretty much the time duration between the disaster that killed her sister and when she was born. And I know that Phyllis, you were talking about or asking Judy what made her feel that sense of being a replacement child. And I know, Judy, you answered it pretty precisely in terms of how you knew that there was only going to be 2 children if your sister had lived. But I also picked up a sense of something you actually discussed on our last episode about transgenerational trauma, that during the grief cycle your mother was going through while she carried you, she must have been communicating that grief through her DNA or in utero through whatever is going on during the 9 months when you're in utero. So what is your take on that as to actually communicating to you internally through your own DNA that you were a replacement child, or that it may have played a part in the syndrome that maybe you were involved in?
Well, it's something that I did learn is that when a mother is under stress and is pregnant, that the fetus is bathed more in cortisol, which can have an effect on the development of every organ, including the brain.
Wow.
Which is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So it's physiological as well as even emotional that this takes place. And I carry that through even to my sister Linda, who is Cheryl's mother, who I talk about in White Flag, and how, her life was filled with trauma, from the time she was 2, all the way through her life with, surgery after surgery, and also, social pressures of someone who looks different and, has that kind of stress in their life all the time. So the transgenerational trauma piece and epigenetics, which is part of that, I believe, made a difference certainly in my life and in Cheryl's life, and carries through the family. So I like to keep my son appraised of that as well. We talk about it, and he's aware. He's a social worker, so he's aware of all this. Hopefully.
So Judy, I have hundreds of questions, but
okay.
I just need for you to be patient with me while I try.
No, it's great. It's great.
As respectfully as I can, because I realize this is a very delicate subject for you, and I'm so glad you found writing to be the catharsis, and the way to express yourself and share your feelings, and of course your insights with everyone. I guess the first question I have is, how did you know your parents only wanted 2 children?
I was told.
By who? Do you recall?
Conversation with, overhearing, but it was known. It was one of those things that's known in a family. We only wanted 2 children, and we wanted 2 children. So, yeah, it was.
That seems like such a harsh thing to share with a child.
Yeah.
That to even plant the seed that you wouldn't be here if this didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the cascading effects of learning something like that, I can see how it could truly affect how you identify with yourself and how you even see yourself as a full-fledged member of your family.
I do. I recall like certain conversations with aunts and uncles. I had one. I remember one uncle saying, that I wasn't like Donna. Well, she's not like Donna. Donna was. Whenever there's a child who's died, they do kind of turn into an angel child. Nothing. They can't do anything wrong, of course. So there was always that comparison. There's no way that there is not that comparison. Wow. And for a while after I was writing the replacement child, I think about 2 years. It took me a long time to write that book, about 5 years, because I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't written a book before. And I got very angry with my father at one point, that because I realized that a lot of the withholding and distance had affected certainly my relationships, my marriages, everything. This is my fourth marriage, I'll tell you that. And, I'm finally very happily married. But, that part of that missing piece of my father, I believe was something detrimental to me. Now, I don't blame him anymore, and I have certainly gotten rid of that kind of anger towards him because I know what he was going through. He lost his child. He lost his firstborn. He really just couldn't get over it. He just couldn't. He did the best he could. And
did you have an open conversation with your mom about this when
No.
you were older? Is it just something she was grieving enough and you didn't want to add to that grief, or you had questions that you hesitated to even ask? How did that dynamic work?
Well, much like many families, we didn't talk about it. we didn't,
we didn't talk about the Irish. I didn't realize it was.
Oh no. No. We didn't talk about it at all. In fact, I didn't even know the anniversary of the plane crash until I was starting to write that book. And
that's where all the research comes in.
Right.
Right.
And then I didn't know my sister Donna's birthday until years after, when I had something scheduled for that day, it's July 25th. And my sister Linda said, "Oh, it's on Donna's birthday." And I had no idea that was Donna's birthday. I mean, we have a Jewish tradition on a yort site, which is the day of death, that you light a candle for that person. I realized that my mother always lit the candle on the date of that plane crash, but she never told me why.
Right.
She never talked about it. She never talked about Donna. They didn't talk about her. There was kind of a memorial wall to her on my father's side of the room in their bedroom. And so that was it. I only remember my mother talking about Donna once when I was, maybe 12 or so, and talking about a picture of her that she was too fat to walk at that age. She said she just doted on her and got her everything she wanted. And, she told me kind of a funny story about her. And then the only time my father spoke of her was when I had to talk to him in his 80s about what does he want to do, when he passes away. What do you, you have to talk about. I didn't want to, but we had to. And he said that he wanted to be cremated, which is not a Jewish tradition, because that's how his daughter died, which was, that was tough. Tough conversation.
How did the dynamic work out between you and your now older sister, who was also in that horrific fire?
Mm-hmm.
Did it interfere with the bonding you had with her? Did she ever kind of, intimate that you were replacing Donna?
I think, that was a different kind of dynamic because she didn't remember, and she was 2 years old. We had a kind of reversed age relationship, so that I felt a little bit like her protector, even though I was younger.
Interesting.
Because I felt she needed that. There were kids that would stare, or they would say nasty things, or they, how that is with anybody different. And I felt like I needed to protect her from that. From a very young age.
Yes. Well, I look at the prologue that you wrote in the book. I mean, if you don't mind my quoting, it's almost like a poem. And I know it was your dedication to Donna and your mother. And so I just have to quote it based on what you just said. "I am older now than you will ever be. Sometimes you come to me on the wind, a gentle whisper on a morning breeze, not to frighten your little sister. At first, I didn't recognize you, but I know it's you. Walking to school on a crisp fall morning, I hear music. Sometimes a tune. She was just 17. Other times a soaring trumpet or a wailing sax, music from the trees inside the clouds. You point to everyday enchantments. Teach me to wallow in the small delights of this fleeting life. It sounds like to me that while you were writing the book, you were getting to know your sister you never met. And you definitely had a bond because she was kind of the explanation of your own identity. But at the same time, you were understanding the value that your father placed in her as while you were trying to develop yourself.
I'll tell you the story of writing that little piece, which is not in the, there's two versions of Replacement Child. There's a first version that came out in 2009, and then there's this second version that came out in 2013. And that piece was not in the first version, but it was the first thing I ever wrote about Donna. And it was when I was in college, and I started to think about this. So that was my first, kind of foray into thinking about her, even though I realized I had always been thinking about her. Strangely.
When you talk to the people in the group that you found, the support group, are there these kinds of comments? There are shared commonalities. For instance, the family doesn't talk about the child that passed. Nobody talks about the circumstances. Somewhere along the line, there's an intimation to a child that they are, your parents never wanted more than 2 or 3 children, and here you are. Are these common things that are communicated to the replacement child along the way?
Eerily, yes.
Are they?
It's so strange, not strange, but understandable. The more you talk to people that have this in common, the more these commonalities come across. Some to more or lesser degree than others. Some people are very damaged by it, I have to say. They might have a much more extreme version of this with their parents than I did. I still felt loved. I know I felt loved from my mother unconditionally all the time. And I was lucky to have that. One person in our group says she never felt love from her mother. So that was a totally different experience for her. So it's different for everybody, but those commonalities of feeling lesser and not feeling that they are themselves or are allowed to be themselves are a common theme that go through. And that's really why we formed that group, is right. To bring, some of these awarenesses so that people can, talk about it. And it does cripple some people's lives. Other people become creative. There's a lot of creative people that were, replacement children, from Salvador Dali to Freud to Elvis is a twinless twin, which is another kind of replacement child.
We're about to take another break, but everyone out there must get this book, Replacement Child. It does not read like a documentary about the events of the Elizabeth plane crashes or even about replacement child syndrome, but it reads as a very moving portrait of what it's like to overcome that kind of trauma, that horrific crash, for example, that made national news. But at the same time, I can only imagine what we've been discussing the last half hour. The impacts are long lasting. So everyone must get this so that they can also find their place if they feel that they are replacement children as well. Amazon.com, by the way. We'll be back in a few to follow up on replacement child syndrome. Stay tuned.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Hey, everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back. Over the last month, you've all seen episodes, obviously with Judy Mandel, as well as other episodes that Phyllis and I have coordinated that all focused on various aspects of mental health. But I think what I've learned even from the last half hour is that when you actually are going through a trauma that defines you and defines the people that you have not really met, but yet you develop a relationship with them because you understand, like especially in Judy's case, if she was considered the replacement child, just the exploration of writing this book, Replacement Child, is helping her find answers to who she is, in addition to what you already were brought up knowing about yourself. But as she also indicated prior to the last break, there are people who discover that they are replacement children for whatever reason, and whether it cripples them or they do not have the ability to come out of that, it is evident that Judy definitely did master that class. I mean, this book was a New York Times bestseller from what I recall, not to mention, of course, the additional book of White Flag, and how Cheryl basically was carrying on the tradition of what happened in 1952, but through her own life experience and your own feelings of having been, quote unquote, a replacement child. You were trying your best to help her, and you felt guilty when it was not your place to feel guilty. But I can now learn and reflect and understand why you were dealing with those emotions. So you must, in your own way, have become not just your own advocate, like I always say for everyone who's on the show, but you have, in a sense, learned to be your own, I guess, not therapist or psychologist in relation to understanding that this as a personality disorder or as a sense of identity. How would you qualify it?
I think I did learn a lot by writing that book. I certainly discovered even the notion of a replacement child through that. And then connecting with other people with the same feelings and the same background almost from different experiences taught me a great deal. And even though I've certainly been in therapy, I mean, nobody ever talked about this. Nobody ever, maybe they never even talked about the plane crash or, asked me about it or asked me about my family's, trauma. But I think it really did help me to realize that there are other people that have been through this. It's not unique, that, just identifying something sometimes gives you a relief. I mean, even, if it's a medical diagnosis, sometimes, you go to the doctor and something's wrong with you and say, what is wrong with me? And it just having the diagnosis makes you feel like, oh, okay, I'm, there's something there. This is a real thing.
It's validated.
It's a real thing.
So this is all in your head. Judy, the sense of belonging is so primal to humans. The sense of belonging to your family, the sense of belonging, having a sense of mission and purpose, belonging to groups. I mean, even if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that sense of belonging is, one of the levels just right after safety.
First level.
No, I think safety and security is first, and then a sense of belonging comes after that. But I can only imagine, and maybe you can share a little bit of, so although there was this energy around, you didn't necessarily belong as a first choice or as a wanted child from the get-go. I'm only trying, I don't even know if I have the words.
Mhm.
But the inference of not talking about anything, the inference of we only wanted 2 children and you wouldn't be here if Donna had lived, that's got to rock your world. And what does that do to your sense of belonging? And how do you realize that, or how does that affect your life going forward?
Well, in my case, it was also a sense of responsibility to make the family whole, and to, I write in the book, to be the salve for the burns. And I think I felt that. I think I always felt that, whether it was unconscious or, subconscious, that that was my role and responsibility, which is a big responsibility for a little kid.
I was just gonna say, my God,
Um,
5.
And it was, my sister Linda would go through surgeries. She would come home, she'd be in pain, she'd need things. And it was really my job to cheer her up and, help her through the recovery period. And that happened every year until she was 18, I think it was. So that was an ongoing occurrence where not only did my mother kind of disappear for a couple of weeks while she was in the hospital, but she would come home and I would be the cheerleader. At one point she came home and I was dressed up in my little nurse uniform, when she came home, which everybody thought was very cute.
Yes.
Which it was cute. I was adorable. So,
Yeah.
I took it seriously.
No,
very seriously.
When you hear the stories of people who've chosen to become a professional caregiver, that's not an uncommon piece. That at one point, somebody in the family needed caring for, and you were the one that stepped up to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, you hear a lot with stand-up comics, Robin Williams in particular, where he talks about, I was responsible for keeping my mom happy, and that's how he started to become funny and then made it his life's work.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece of becoming a professional caregiver, is you become a peacemaker. Like if there's tension in the group, it's up to you then to make sure that everybody's needs are met except yours, because no one's paying attention to your needs. You're paying so much attention to others.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons why professional caregivers do such a lousy job of self-care. It's just that it never dawned on us.
Mm-hmm.
That
very similar. I can really relate to that very much.
Yeah.
I didn't go into that kind of profession, but I certainly could have.
Yes, I'm very surprised you didn't, because you've got all the prerequisites for life experiences at an age.
There are a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists that do relate as replacement children, right, also, or they had someone who needed care in their family. Or
so along the lines of belonging and the need for belonging, can you share with us again, is it the forum? Because I think if people are identifying with, well, that explains a lot, and all of a sudden it's dawning on them that potentially they are a replacement child, mm-hmm, even in adulthood. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that forum, because it sounds like a very open, non-judgmental group of people that offer a sense of belonging with this common event in their life.
It is. It's and they can go to replacementchildforum.com. It's very simple. Okay. So it's just the name, replacementchildforum.com, and on it there are articles, there are resources. Like I said, we have webinars that we do for people. We've done ones on relationships and grief, and we're planning some more of those coming up in the next couple of months.
Have you ever done anything about forgiveness?
No, we haven't. I think we should do that.
I think I want to pitch that, not as me being the person, but I just think that it is quite the topic that should need to be spoken about out loud in a time when, again, this is not something that's talked about, because as I understand forgiveness, it's not letting anybody off the hook the way I've come to know it. It's you're not saying that the event didn't happen. You're not saying that the event that happened, whatever was, is okay and I forgive you. The act of forgiveness is enabling you then to put things down so you can move forward. And I
Absolutely.
think that would be a
Absolutely.
lovely topic for that group
I
because
think so too.
it sounds like there's a need there.
And in my book, Replacement Child, that's where I come to, is forgiveness.
Well,
Especially for
you're
my
also
dad.
kind of forgiving yourself. I mean, did you blame yourself in any way, or is it just forgiveness to all the people in your life, like your father and anything that
I
you may
think there's
have
a
felt?
forgiveness for, not being able to be the child that died. I mean, because there's no way to do that, of course.
Right.
But for me, it was mostly forgiving my dad for, as good a man as he was, and he was, that he could not get over this particular thing for me. He was interestingly, when I wrote that book and my sister read it, she said, my dad wasn't like that. Because siblings, they have different experiences, of course, with their parents. And
Right.
she did not have that experience with him. With interacting with my sister, it was, she should have anything to make her day better for what she's been through, which I agreed with. And, sometimes did her well and sometimes did not, but he was different with her.
How would you compare Replacement Child to White Flag in terms of the continued exploration of intergenerational trauma? Yeah, exactly. Both on Amazon.com, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. But
How would I
would
compare
you
to
compare
that
it
again?
to the sequel? Would you compare it like a subset or subtopic?
It's
I mean,
definitely a continuation and a thread, running straight through to it. As I said, my sister Linda went through so much trauma, and Cheryl was a very sensitive soul, and there's no way that she didn't feel that her whole life.
Wow.
There were other mitigating circumstances, of course, with Cheryl. She had depression, and she also had sexual abuse as a child, and there are all of those pieces of the complexity of substance use disorder as well. But the generational trauma, that I talk about in Replacement Child certainly runs right into White Flag.
Are there any plans for a third book in relation to trauma or substance abuse or addiction or?
I don't know. I'm writing some smaller things. I have an essay coming out, and I'm, thinking about maybe some short stories, just something shorter, because it takes so long to write the book. It takes a long time. But I am learning a lot more that I keep thinking, well, I should have added that as a chapter. I should have had that as a chapter. So, there are, the wheels are starting to turn a little bit about that.
Well, that's good. I mean, overall, I know like what you said in the last section about how when there are so many people, especially the Holocaust survivors that created replacement children, people either, evolve or devolve depending on the circumstances. But I really do see evidence not only in your writing of both books, but just even in our shows together, you definitely have mastered it in being able to define yourself in a much elevated, talented way. You used it to your benefit and to your intent with your life. And
you're very kind.
Thank you. I mean, I don't want to use a joke, but at the same time, I'm also being frank with you. Yeah, I am, but I'm also being. I guess there's a compassion I have because I have understood, even in my own personal experience and having to watch my father in particular, who you had a chance to talk with, and not to mention even I have a cousin that's been going through a lot this past year, and I have found myself, like what you described, reaching out in the name of family to provide the care that with my resources, but not being a doctor. The only thing I could do is advocate. But yet, what it did was allow me this platform, which I've been working on for now 60 plus episodes. So yeah, I think I'm reflecting off of your experience to say that it is in the trauma that we know our best self, whether it's at the moment or in the future. And I hope that the listeners and viewers out there get that message as I have.
Absolutely. Well,
Judy, do the people in your group, in the support group, have they all found artistic ways to express themselves as a way of establishing their own sense of identity. You are a writer and a well-accomplished writer. Are there artists? Are there other people dancing? I mean, you have to express yourself and establish your own sense of identity in some way. Are you finding that people are choosing the arts in this particular group as an avenue to do that?
The arts and psychology, both. Like I said, one of our co-founders is, a psychologist. She's a psychoanalyst, actually, and she teaches, and it's all about replacement child condition. So she is very accomplished in that.
We have to take our final break, but I want you to talk about that in the final section when we want to look at the future of all of this, especially for those that have evolved as a result of their own relation to replacement child syndrome. Ladies and gentlemen, just stay tuned right here on Frank About Health. We'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble!
On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the conclusion of this episode of Frank About Health. It seems that we went over a little bit, so it looks like we have about 10 minutes left, but it's perfect timing to kind of wrap up what we were just talking about, how a lot of people who have had an experience being quote unquote the replacement child have discovered their lives and their livelihoods in the arts and in psychology and caregiving, I presume, and among other things. I wanted you to finish up on that a little bit, so I apologize for having cut you off.
That's fine. There are a lot of artists that come from replacement child background. Salvador Dali was one of them. I don't have that on the tip of my tongue, but if you go to our website, you will see that there's tons of artists and writers and psychologists and renowned psychiatrists. So it's something that has fed a lot of accomplishments as well. So that's a good thing. We like to point to that for people.
I'm never disappointed by the human spirit's desire to be seen, heard, and validated. And you're not getting that for whatever reason, because of cultural family circumstances, or the fact that, your parents or whomever has not really worked through bereavement successfully or in a healthy way. To be able to find the grit, to be able to say, I will not be muffled. I am going to have a voice and I will express myself. However, I can only say, Judy, I can't even imagine the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people you helped by finding the courage and the grit to put this book together. Because I'm sitting here and I'm heartbroken for you, but I am inspired by you.
Oh, that's
And I'm sure that many of our listeners are feeling that way. And I really hope those who are listening, who perhaps suspect that they are replacement children and are just not quite sure, read your book and maybe even join the forum, so that they can find an answer for themselves, even if their parents are no longer with them or anything. But if, sometimes when the dots line up or the stars align, insight and enlightenment happens.
and
Looks
being
like you
seen,
had a very
seen
big
and
family
heard.
there.
Oh, family, little
Your family.
family.
Mhm.
Being seen and heard is such a big part of it. I realized also, in my childhood when I was a little kid, I took up music and I was always, dressing up and dancing around and, drawing attention to myself, in any way I could.
For who you were.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. And later on, I, performed. I had, I played music, and that had a lot to do with it.
And thankfully, you found that and not something else.
Exactly. Exactly.
You found expression as opposed to numbing yourself.
I'm grateful for that.
That is where the courage and the grit came from, and clearly that needs to be celebrated and offered up in thanks that you didn't go a different way.
Yes, I'm very grateful for that myself.
I know I read your poem in your book earlier, but all this talk about Salvador Dali, I actually have another quote that I'm reading from Wikipedia, and I think it's relevant, especially in terms of understanding that when anyone feels that they're inadequate for whatever the circumstances may be, and in the topic of this show, the whole aspect of being a replacement child, it says here, in 1980, clinicians Robert Krell and Leslie Rapkin identified 3 types of replacement child: the haunted child, who lives in a family overwhelmed by guilt and silence; the bound child, who is incomparably precious and sometimes overprotected; and the resurrected child, who is treated as a reincarnation of the dead sibling. I gather that's probably what you must have felt.
And the overprotective piece too. I mean, that filters down. I mean, my poor son, he's definitely was an overprotective little guy. Still, he still has to call me if he takes a plane ride. So he's 34 years old.
Right, yes, absolutely. No, but it says here artists Salvador Dali and Vincent van Gogh.
Oh yeah, Van Gogh is a famous one. That's a great one because he actually had to pass by a gravestone every day on his way to school with his own name on it because his brother was named the same as him, who died.
They both were
a fascinating story. Yeah.
Brothers of the same name who died before their birth. They're resurrected children. It's incredible. By the way, I can also relate Vincent van Gogh because he was also an epileptic, and my whole history has been about epilepsy. So I guess Vincent van Gogh is the package deal in understanding a lot of healthcare issues.
Yes, he is. Poor guy. He had a rough time. Yeah,
I can't imagine the complication of not just feeling like you're a replacement child, but actually being named as if you are the reincarnation of that child.
Exactly. One of the
I can't even imagine where a toddler or a young child begins to try to make sense or peace with that.
My one of the people in the co-founders is she tells a story of the fact that she lived within view of her brother's gravestone, her whole life. Those kinds of things, don't go away. They don't go away.
Wow. Well, we are about 2 minutes left, so now's all the promotional time. I did want to ask you, based on our last show, you said there was a rally going on about a month ago about the government's involvement in helping people with addiction. Do you have any updates on that?
Actually, it was a memorial kind of thing for people who had died of opioid use, and it was in Washington by the organization's called Truth Farm, PHARM, and actually, it's a very good organization for people to visit. Truthfarm.com. Actually, truthfarm.org. And they have a lot of great information for people who have people with substance use disorder in their lives. They have training, and they have a great deal of information on there.
And then again, what are your socials where people can reach out to you for anything? Replacement child, white flag, so forth and so on.
Well, there's the replacementchildforum.com. There's my website is judymandel.com. So it's JUDYMANDEL.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm actually on everything now. Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And I even got into TikTok for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it's out there. So I thought I would try it. You know, Instagram pictures. They can find me almost anywhere.
Well, they can also find you right here on talkradio.nyc, both the show we've just done as well as the show we did last week, and as well as last month, because last week it was encored. But ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for our Friday slate of shows, which are Philanthropy in Focus with Tommy D and Stephen Fry's Friday, right here on talkradio.nyc. Next week, right here on talkradio.nyc, we will be hosting a special guest, Ben Lytle, with Phyllis and I and James Swanson, as we cover or uncover what life in the post-pandemic might look like. He calls himself a futurist. His book is called The Potentialist. It's a very interesting program, and you will have a chance to even comment about it because it was pre-recorded, allowing people time to ask any questions on our YouTube channel. So other than those things, thank you, Sam, again. Thank you, Dylan, for producing the show. I finally said thank you before the show ended. And at the same time, thank you, Phyllis, for always being here and bringing the whole medical awareness issues to what we talk about every week. And Judy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so everybody, we're signing off. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.